and folks logging on here. As you probably just heard, we're going to be recording this call so that folks that couldn't make it tonight will be able to watch and learn a little bit about the post-fire recovery efforts in the Upper Poudre Watershed. So I'm Gretchen Runing. I'm the Executive Director for the Larimer Conservation District, and really happy to be here to help co-host this community meeting for you folks with a few of our project partners from the Coalition for the Poudre River Watershed, Stillwater Sciences. So this evening, in case you didn't read the overview yet, we'll be discussing some post-fire riverscape restoration work in the Upper Poudre River Watershed. As you all are probably intimately aware of, the Upper Poudre has seen a lot of impact through the 2012 High Park fire and the 2020 Cameron Peak fire. And along with that, of course, we had a lot of that post-fire flooding and some of those debris flow events that have had a pretty heavy impact on the landscape. So tonight we have a couple partners here who have been working collaboratively in the watershed to improve the ecological health and resilience of the Upper Poudre and the watershed that we all love and call home. So first off, we'll have Hallie Strevey from the Coalition for the Poudre River Watershed share a little bit of an update about some of the post-fire recovery efforts that are happening in your neighborhood. So Hallie, would you mind just hopping on and introducing yourself and a little bit about CPRW?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Hallie Strevey. I'm the director of the Coalition for the Poudre River Watershed. So CPRW has been around since the 2012 High Park fire. This year, we actually celebrated our 10-year anniversary as a 501c3 nonprofit. Our other staff person here tonight is Megan Lohith, who's our communications and marketing manager. So I'm just going to share an update on the Cameron Peak fire, the work that we've been doing. And for those of you who live near the South Fork, a lot of this will be no surprise to you, especially in regards to the impacts that we've been seeing over the past 3 years. But this is what brings us here today is some of the work that we've been partnering with the Conservation District and others across the Burn area to help the watershed recover.
Thank you so much, Hallie. So after that, we'll have Johannes Beebe from Stillwater Sciences, and he's going to share a little bit about and introduce the concept of low-tech process-based restoration and some of our collaborative work that's being planned on the Little South Fork of the Poudre. So Johannes, can you hop on and introduce yourself real quick?
Yes, hi everyone. Thank you, Gretchen. So I'm Johannes Beebe. I am a river scientist designer who works with Stillwater Sciences. We're based in Fort Collins, Colorado, and we have worked on the Poudre extensively, doing river health and kind of function assessments on the entire watershed. So we're very familiar with it, and we're excited to be here. We're excited for the opportunity on Lazy D Ranch. It's an exciting one, and I'll be talking more about it in a little bit after Hallie.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Johannes. So yeah, just to give you guys an overview, we'll do those two presentations, and then we'll have some time set aside at the end of the presentations for community members to ask any questions that you might have of these experts and partners working on this project. So before we get started, can we just go around and have everyone else on the call introduce themselves? So maybe let's start with Darcy.
Yes, thanks, Gretchen. Hi, Darcy Saiget. I'm one of the 6 owners of the Lazy D Ranch, and we're just very interested in everything to do with the Upper Watershed and all the work of our partners here.
Thanks, Darcy. Next, I have Nicole Gilbert.
Yes, hi, Nicole Gilbert, and I'm one of the owners of lots 1 and 2.
Awesome. Good to meet you, Nicole. Let's go with Amy next.
I'm Amy Williams, and my husband Todd and I have lot 10 in the subdivision and are the resident caretakers of the Lazy D Ranch on the South Fork.
Thanks, Amy. Thanks for being here. Laura, let's go with you next.
I'm Laura Murray. I'm one of the owners at the Lazy D Ranch, and we're just like to see what we can do to help the watershed recover and get good, clean water for all of us.
Great. And I think the last person on here is Monique. So Monique, you're on mute.
Sorry.
You're good.
Also one of the owners of lots 1 and 2.
Great. Thank you guys so much. Appreciate you guys introducing yourselves. It's good to meet everybody. Thanks again for coming. So yeah, without further ado, let's just get started with our presentation. So I'm going to pass the mic over to Hallie to kick us off.
Thanks, Gretchen. All right. So the Coalition for the Poudre River Watershed, but we to improve and maintain the ecological health of the Poudre River Watershed through community collaboration. You can see the watershed here on the slide, and we actually work from headwaters to confluence. A lot of our initial work started in the headwaters after the High Park fire, but we work all the way down to the South Platte River. And we've been very actively involved in the recovery efforts after the Karen Peak fire. So the Poudre Watershed is no stranger to wildfire. We have experienced the state's largest wildfire, the Karen Peak in 2020, and then the High Park and Hewlett Gulch wildfires burned over 90,000 acres in 2012. So I think this map of the watershed and the fire, the burn areas just kind of really show the extent of the watershed that is burned, but there still is plenty that is left to burn. So that's a story for another day. But these fires cause issues for up to 10 years. And so we're still, we're 3 years out from the Cameron Peak fire and are still experiencing impacts. Sorry, my slides seem to be slow to turn. So one of the other things that I wanted to highlight today is just how much the burn extent of these various fires across the Front Range and the state of Colorado has changed over the last 20 years. So in 2020 alone, we had some of the state's largest wildfires, including the Pine Gulch, Karen Peak, the Mullen Fire, which was in Wyoming and extended into Colorado, and then the East Troublesome Fire. The Karen Peak, Mullen, and East Troublesome were all burning at the same time. I'm sure if you were in the state at that time, you vividly remember what it was like during the months of August through really December as those fires were burning. But obviously the extent and severity of these fires has just only increased over the last 20 years. Just wanted to kind of show this map about how the Cameron Peak fire burned over the course of the few months that it was going. So it started in the headwaters. And so, I mean, really a fire that starts in the headwaters and goes all the way, to the city of Fort Collins is pretty rare. So we see impacts that vary across from, all the way up in the headwaters to Horsetooth. Basically, those impacts vary in scale. But the fire had several different run events. So there was a big run in Labor Day weekend where the fire grew significantly, and that's in green. And then another big run event in October where it then started, it jumped watershed boundaries and burned into the Big Thompson watershed as well. And so these different run events were really where we saw some of the most severe burns from the fire. So that the fire was just burning really high severity. There was high winds. And I'm sure I definitely remember those 2 weekends very vividly. So when we look at the Cameron Peak fire impacts, what we first do is look at all the different things that we can count. So those initial things that we know the fire caused immediately. And so a 208,000 acre burn perimeter, or acres burned, 25-mile long burn perimeter, over 1,000 stream miles burned. And then over 32 miles of the wild and scenic corridor burned. And the Poudre is pretty unique in that it is the only wild and scenic river in the state of Colorado. Also 3 watersheds burned, so the Poudre, Big Thompson, and the Larimer River watersheds. And it also impacted 5 high mountain reservoirs, which has caused some big issues for the cities of Greeley and Fort Collins. And then it impacted 16 mountain communities and burned close to 500 structures. So some of the immediate impacts that we saw after the fire were really those immediate erosion impacts. So the debris flow, so the Black Hollow event on the summer after, so July 2021, issues with sedimentation in roadways and the sediment going directly into our water supply. Flash flood warnings, which we're still experiencing even to this day. There was a flash flood warning in the burn area and across both the Poudre and the Big Thompson. And something of note is really, this fire impacted National Forest System lands the most. So the majority of the burn was on Forest Service land, followed up by private, state. Some of Rocky Mountain National Park also burned. So it's pretty vast scale of these impacts across both public and private, and the way that we address these issues can be really similar. So what we're dealing with now, and we will be at least for the next 10 years, these long-term impacts. So severe wildfire like the Cameron Peak fire can alter watershed processes. And so this can look like, maybe you had a stream that only would flow during runoff or after, a rain event, and now that stream has become perennial and it runs year round. We'll see a lot of excess sediment and nutrients, and this is really one of the biggest issues that our partners, especially the municipalities, City of Greeley and City of Fort Collins, are most concerned about, because this can have great impacts on water quality. In fact, both the cities of Fort Collins and Greeley take their water directly off the river, and over the last 2 years, they have not been able to use Poudre River water. They've had to shut off their intake structure because the water was so turbid and full of sediment that they couldn't treat it. And that happened upwards of 40 days, both in the summer of 2021 and 2022. We luckily this year have not seen those same impacts with the rain that we've been getting. And so that does seem like a good sign so far for this year. And then probably one of the most impactful in terms of threats to life and property are those debris flows, including those flash flood events, roads that are washed out. There's lots of private dirt roads that can have major issues after a fire, and then those extensive water quality issues that can last for years. I think even in the Hayman fire that happened in 2002, they're still seeing impacts to water quality. So one of the biggest reasons why we see these big erosion events, the debris flows, the issues to water quality is when we have a severe wildfire like the Cameron Peak fire, it completely burns up that leaf litter layer, all that duff. And when the fire burns so hot, it basically turns the soil into concrete. And so it's called hydrophobic soil. And so when the soil turns hydrophobic, when a raindrop hits the soil, it's not actually able to penetrate the surface. And so instead of sinking into the soil, it simply just sloughs right off along with the ash and sediment, and then it goes directly into the river and our water supply. So that is directly tied to that. What I just explained is really known as hill slip erosion. And so that's one of the first things that we try to mitigate is the issues from hill slip erosion. And I'll go through that shortly here, but just wanted to go through some of the photos of these different impacts that we see after the fire. Sorry, my cat just jumped up and knocked down my water bottle. So this is a good photo from the canyon, looking down into the canyon of the various gullies and rills that form after a severe wildfire. And so this is, that's basically the main transport of the sediment directly into our water supply. We also see major impacts with roads following wildfire. So roads are really great conduits of they basically turn into into streams. And so when we have all these private roads, Forest Service roads. There's many roads that were used as old logging roads that have been out of use for many years. You know, some roads that people didn't even know existed, all of a sudden we now see after a fire, and they basically just serve as a way for the water to just travel directly down the hill slope into the river, and can become new stream channels, which can be very problematic. And then we also can see massive impacts to streams. And so this stream is one of the many sheep creeks in the watershed. And it, before the fire, was a really small stream, wasn't really considered perennial. And now it is perennial, and you can see it's had some major erosion issues and head cutting as all of that sediments and ash starts coming down the hill slope, and the watershed processes have been altered. So there's just more water going through the stream than there ever was before. And then there's lots of impacts to our infrastructure. And so, as I mentioned before, those 5 high mountain reservoirs had severe burns through the fire around that infrastructure, and that can cause major sedimentation issues for the operations for our municipalities. And so these are other areas that we classify as high priority, just simply because it's where a lot of our drinking water supply comes from. And then, of course, those debris flows, which this is a photo of the Black Hollow event that did tragically take the lives of several people. And so this is really one of the things that we try to mitigate to the best of our ability. And unfortunately, while we can predict where these might happen, it's really all dependent on where the rainstorm comes and how much it rains and the intensity of that rain in terms of the impacts that we might see. But this is really what I think keeps us all up at night, are these types of events. And then here's just another photo of that Black Hollow event. So the other thing that I really wanted to highlight is just the extent of collaboration that has happened in response to the Cameron Peak fire. So from the moment the fire began, a variety of different entities got together, including CPRW and others on this call, and trying to figure out ways to start planning for restoration, because we knew pretty quickly after the fire started that it was going to be a large fire with severe impacts. And so there's been over 40 entities involved throughout the during both the active response and also now the recovery efforts for the fire. And it's still going to be ongoing for many years to come. So now that we're getting to the recovery piece, you know, we have limited resources. So we have 200,000 acres that burned, limited resources to treat those acres. While millions of dollars have come into the state and directly to the fire for trying to mitigate impacts, it still is just a drop in the bucket compared to the scale of the fire. And so because of that, we worked with partners to identify priority areas for restoration. And so this is helping us focus where we want to spend those limited resources to the best of our ability to have the biggest impact in the long term on the watershed. So as a part of this, with partners, we worked on a post-fire watershed hazard analysis. And this the first piece of data, this is basically just a GIS exercise, and it's been updated over the past 3 years as well. So we have the most up-to-date data as possible each year. So we first looked at the soil burn severity, and the soil burn severity is taken immediately after the fire by the Forest Service. And this basically ranks from low to moderate to high burn severity. And we look at that because the more intense the soil is burned, the more impacts we're going to see. We also looked at the hill slope erosion potential, and this was a model developed by the Colorado Forest Restoration Institute. And then we looked at a debris flow hazard analysis that was developed by the U.S. Geological Survey. And then combining that with a layer of data of all the different roads that we know exist within 100 meters of streams, and also the road stream crossings, because as I mentioned, that roads cause some of the biggest issues. So this is just an example of one of the pieces of data. So this is the soil burn severity map. And you can see how variable the fire did burn. So lots of moderate to high severity, but there were areas that were unburned even within the actual burn perimeter, and areas of low burn severity. And those are where, that kind of level of fire is really what we want to see in the future. So here is the most up-to-date map of the burn area and our priorities. And so this map includes all of that data that I just reviewed with you, and it ranks the watersheds from low to high priority. So the watersheds that are yellow and blue and green are the low to moderate. So green is lowest, blue is low, and then yellow is moderate. And then high to highest priority is orange and red. You can also see all the different areas where this is actually just includes our mulching. So the areas in blue are where we did the aerial mulching over the last 2 years. And I think this is actually, this is missing some of the 2022 mulching, but that's okay. Because the most important part of this map is that you can see the different names of the watersheds. And I circled the upper South Fork Poudre, so you can see that is where you all own property or live. And this is one of our highest priority areas for restoration work based on our prioritization. So our restoration program has focused on 3 different methods. So aerial mulching, point mitigation, and reforestation. So I'm really going to dive mostly into the point mitigation work today because that's really more relevant to the overall discussion, but just wanted to highlight the other things that we've been doing as well. So the extent of the work that has happened to date, as I mentioned, over 40 partner organizations have been involved. Over 24 projects have been completed, and this is with CPRW and our partners. We've mulched over 11,000 acres of high priority burned hill slopes across both the Poudre and the Big Thompson. We've spent over $25 million of federal funds, 11 million of state funds, and 7 million of local and state or local and private funds. And here is I think this is the most up-to-date map of all the different things that have, the projects that have occurred so far to date. So there's a bunch of different colors on here. You can see the gray is aerial mulching. The green is Forest Service projects. There's other colors that show completed or projects that are in planning. But you can see the extent is vast. We've done work from where the fire started, and mainly focused, and a lot of work in that Pingree Park area, because that's in the South Fork, because that's been one of our highest priorities, and then along the canyon as well. So our aerial mulching program is now complete. So we mulched throughout 2021 and 2022, and for the next few years, we're working with CSU to monitor the effectiveness of the mulch. And one of the main reasons why we do this, why we focus on aerial mulching immediately, is to get something on those hill slopes. So basically to try to slow the flow of water from coming down during those rainstorm events, trying to keep sediment on the hill slopes. And then this is also can be a good way of at least getting something on the soil so vegetation can reestablish easier within the next few years. So we are done aerial mulching. Most of the research has shown that it's really most effective within the first few years after a fire. The next focus area is point mitigation treatments. And so a lot of this initially was through the Emergency Watershed Protection Program, and that's with the Natural Resource Conservation Service. And this is really focused on protecting life and property. So I'm sure some of you are aware of this program, but it's helping to fix roads, protect homes, and bring things back to how they used to be before the fire, and just trying to protect that infrastructure in the face of future flood events. And really where we're focused now is this more point-based restoration within stream channels. And so this is really, a lot of this work is what we call low-tech process-based restoration. So it's really trying to work with the natural system and what the stream's already trying to do. And so this can be done through a variety of different techniques, and a lot of it is done by hand, and so that means it's lower cost. You can do more work across a watershed when it is lower cost and done by hand. It's a lot of these structures can be put in without machinery, which is also really useful. It lowers costs and also impact to the stream channel itself. So really the goal here is trying to store sediment, improve riparian and in-stream habitat, and try to restore those riparian functions. So we're focusing a lot of this work in areas where we knew that beaver used to exist and they no longer do, or areas where we want beaver to come back. And so we install these different structures to basically mimic what beavers can do, and in hopes that eventually they'll return, or if not, we'll be able to at least bring some function back to these stream systems, which is really important for a post-fire system. And then finally, just wanted to highlight all the various research that is ongoing from the fire. So I hope within the next few years, we'll have a lot of data to share with you all, but we're working with CSU and the Forest Service, the Rocky Mountain Research Station, and others to collect data on a variety of different things. We're monitoring our projects, we're monitoring water quality. And so there's just going to be a lot of good data out there to show the effectiveness, hopefully, of the projects that we've completed to date, and we'll have lots of lessons learned as well for the future, any future wildfire that we might see. And then just in case you guys weren't aware, there is some active up-to-date data where you can check in on stream flow and precipitation that's available at the Open Water Foundation. And so that's another good resource just to be aware of. And with that, I'm going to end my presentation, and I think we're going to hand it to Johannes, and then we'll do questions, I think, at the end. Is that correct?
Yes, thanks, Hallie. That's perfect. So yeah, Hallie mentioned some of those point mitigation types of projects of the process base. So Johannes is going to dive into that a little bit more and share a little bit more about the science and techniques that go into that type of work. So thanks, Johannes.
Perfect. Thank you, guys. And Hallie did a really good job setting the basis for everything. So I will just jump in. All right. So yeah, so we are here to discuss beaver meadow restoration that will occur on Lazy D Ranch. So I'm kind of going to go through and talk to you guys about why it's an important area to restore, not just for, the river and health there, but also for areas downstream. And then also talk a little bit about a little more in depth about the different types of treatments we can expect to do, and just kind of go through and kind of explain the reasoning, the basis of what we would like to do on the property, and go from there. So I'm going to skip over this. Hallie did a really good job going through, obviously, Cameron Peak wildfire, burn severity. It's really important, like Hallie mentioned. When soils are really highly burned, it means usually you get a lot more debris flows, more sediment entering the system. So when that happens, if you're familiar with the Black Hollow event, like Hallie showed pictures, I have another picture here. But basically, when you do get that really high severity burns and you get those perfect thunderstorms, they kind of equal a lot of water, a lot of sediment, a lot of wood ending up somewhere. So going through all of the flood recovery from 2013, we really learned a lot. We really learned that, during these areas, during these kind of storm events, whether it's post-fire or just big flood events, where do we see this wood? Where do we see this sediment end up? We're calling these the very dynamic areas. And there's certain areas that are just more what we call depositional than other areas, areas where sediment will drop out, where wood will drop out. It can drop out anywhere, but these just areas are more prone to that. So these areas are usually confluences. So like for Lazy D, Pennock Creek and where the Little South Fork hit, that kind of confluence can be a big area where you could expect during a big storm event. Maybe it's Pennock, maybe it's Little South Fork, maybe it's both, but they might bring sediment, and usually there's a bigger, wider floodplain there from old historic deposits. So those are areas where you could see sediment and wood kind of pile up. And then also what we call natural or artificial constrictions. So what that means by constrictions is just going from wide to narrow. And this can be natural. So it could be valley pinches, just natural areas where the valley's wide and then it pinches down. What that pinch does in high floods tends to back the water up and drop sediment and drop wood. So you kind of get a lot of deposition upstream of these valley pinches. Also, kind of artificial ones are like bridges. So a lot of the rivers you'll see, especially after Black Hollow event, you'll see the one bridge downstream in Black Hollow is now not there anymore. So they usually get clogged with different types of sediment or wood or other things. And then usually the river kind of backs up from there. So those artificial constrictions are really big areas where we see big change in rivers as well. And then finally, beads in the chain. So I kind of want to talk a little bit about beads in the chain and describe what these are. So this is an example from a different project, but it's kind of more of a artificial bead in the chain, artificial constriction. So what a bead in the chain is you picture kind of like a necklace or something like that, just of a different chain. You eventually get to the bigger, wider opening, and that's what we're calling the bead. So in this picture here, the river runs from right to left. So it's the Yampa River upstream of Steamboat. So we have upstream, the red area is our chain. It's constricted by a railroad bridge on one side, road on the other side. So the river is really hemmed in here. So we'd expect, maybe during a flood stage, a lot of this will just be transporting sediment, transporting wood. And then it hits this bead, this more wide open valley. There still is a railroad that's pinching on one side, but it expands. That valley really opens up. So the power of that river starts to go down. And so you'll see sediment deposit, you see wood deposit. So this is where, in this bead, is where we'd expect the most kind of dynamism to happen, that river to move, that river, like kind of, if there's infrastructure here, there would be greater risk in this area than other areas potentially. And then downstream, again, it gets confined and it goes right down into Steamboat. So in this example, this bead upstream of Steamboat is really important because this is an area, it's actually owned by City of Steamboat. It's pretty open area. So this is an area where we can allow sediment to deposit. We can allow wood to deposit. It's an area where the river can adjust after a big flood event, as opposed to right through Steamboat where we don't want that to happen. So these are really good areas for floodwater attenuation, sediment attenuation, and energy dissipation. And these are the areas in the 2013 flood that we really saw the biggest changes and became really big, important areas for us to focus on restoration. So when we take that same perspective and we look at Lazy D, we have the same thing. So the river, as you guys know, goes from left to right across the screen, excuse me. And upstream, it's narrow, confined, steeper channel. And what we'd expect here is in a bigger flood, upstream with the fire, more sediment loading, we'd expect a lot of this sediment, maybe wood that's been burned and falls in the channel. We expect it to come down the system and it would hit this bead. And ideally, it would dissipate its energy, it would spread out, it would drop wood, it would drop sediment here. And Lazy D is actually really great for that because right now it's mainly used for agriculture. So there's a really big open area here where we can allow that to happen. We can allow that river to move. There's a less risk to infrastructure in this area. And then just downstream, we obviously get back into many of the family homes, and then we cross down farther down to the other community downstream. So as far as the Little South Fork, Lazy D Ranch really pops out as a really important area where can we let this river do what it needs to during these flood events, especially post-fire. So part of our work was to go out there and look a little bit more, investigate, do we have a project here? Is there a way where we can connect floodplain to get all these processes we want, the sediment deposition, the wood storage, the floodwater attenuation? So before we went out on site, we did a little desktop aerial analyses. I have these blown up more. If people want to see these, we can send them out. But going from top left down to the bottom, we see the earliest aerial we found was from 1953, going through 76, 1999, all the way to 2019. So one of the biggest things we could see through here is that historically, this channel is most likely channelized and pushed to the south side of the valley. You can see it's really straight. And obviously, most of the agriculture happens over on the rest of the valley floor. You can see in the 1976 photo, there's a lot of wet kind of river-looking patterns across this field. Those are probably historical channel. That might have been the river could have been across this side one day. Really historically, we'd assume this wide open valley probably would have been, the entire thing might have been beaver meadow. There might have been a big giant willow kind of beaver, multi-thread channels, all this stuff through the entire area. But then once agriculture came in, the land was probably cleared, maybe beaver were removed. And so then that channel starts to change, which I'll talk a little bit about later on. But it, instead of spreading out, it gets more back to one single channel, can cut down and disconnect that floodplain. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But as we get through 99, same thing, just kind of looks about the same. And then we get to 2019, which I'll have some zoomed in photos on. But in 2019, we can really see that there is definitely some side channel habitat, maybe some beaver stuff going on. That obviously now we know there were beaver out there, but I'll really talk about the where the beaver were historically on Lazy D. So 2013 aerial image. What's important about this image is we zoomed in to the middle of Lazy D Ranch. And what you see are these really nice side channels, and they look flooded. And what you can see on a zoomed in one, which I'll show later, there is actually beaver ponds in here that look like to be a lodge. So what we see over here is beaver meadow. So there is an off-channel beaver habitat and meadow over on this side. The Little South Fork runs through the middle. The Little South Fork, we wouldn't really expect beaver to dam up itself. It's pretty high energy. We did talk to the landowners, and we do know that at one point the beaver did try to dam up the main channel farther down, and it blew out with the first peak flow. So that's what we kind of expect. We'd expect beaver to be maybe more set up onto the floodplain side channel networks off of the main channel. So from 2013, we jump forward to 2016. You can see this a little bit better. There is a lodge, there's a pond. But what you should also notice is now the left side. Previously, it just kind of looked dry. Left side is starting to get wet, and there's a little ponding starting to happen. So we're thinking the beaver are starting to expand their habitat out onto the river left side. So this side over here. Move forward to 2019, and I'll have zoomed up images of these later. Same thing, but now 2019, the main beaver community is over here on the river left side, their main lodge, their main pond. The channel follows all the way down. So they have a really unique, diverse side channel network now in river left. River right, however, the channel, we lost the kind of ponded area. It looks like it's kind of drained. It looks like this area is kind of starting to not be used anymore by the beaver. So that's something we want to kind of investigate. So just to take a step back, focus in on the beat of the chain. Upstream from the houses, this is an area where we can let the river work and do what it needs to, drop sediment, store wood. So this is what we saw in the aerials. When we actually went out in the field, what we notice is the beat in the chain. It is smaller, it's still there, but this field up here is pretty disconnected. The channel is cut down and to the side through time. So water and big floods tends not to get out across this valley, maybe through here a little bit, but it tends to stick more into this darker green riparian area we see here now. And then this purple box will show you where we are doing the focus of the restoration work to restore these old beaver meadows, and I'll go into that next. So this is a zoomed in of that purple box. So again, as I was mentioning earlier, this is the 2019 aerial. You can see here there is still a little bit of ponding, but down here we do see that a lot of those channels are inset and they're not really spreading water out anymore. Most of the activity is on this lower left side. So jumping back to 2013, once again, there's a reason for that, and we're going to go into that shortly. But basically, this beaver pond in 2013 was really established. This was really dry on this side. So the beaver hadn't even moved over into this section at this point. So what do we see out there today? So I'm going to start, I would take one step back, sorry. So we're going to start with this red boxed area. So this is the upstream river right side, and we'll talk about this area first, and then we'll go down to the orange colored area. So this is the side channel network on the river right side. So as you can see, it is no longer dammed up by beaver dams. It is not spreading water out anymore. This channel is cut down and it's starting to incise. And that is because the beaver dams, I'll show this a little bit later, the beaver dams basically hold the channel up and make the water spread out. So once those dams are gone, the channel is able to cut down again and it's no longer spreading flow out. So this is kind of just what the channel generally looks out there today. We did see there were some major head cuts. And so I'll show you some diagrams of what exactly a head cut is. But there's like 10 or 11 head cuts now moving up through this entire side, river right side. So It's an area that's at risk to losing all the connection. And what we do expect is as these head cuts migrate up, the floodplain is going to get more and more disconnected. That beaver meadow will dry out and we'll lose that kind of river health and function, but we'll also lose that kind of fire buffer that beaver meadows can really provide during future fires. We have really wet areas, so they can provide a buffer and kind of help slow fire spreading. It can also help the river recover faster afterwards, and it can also continue to trap sediment while other areas aren't able to do that. So these areas are really important. So these are two things that we call channel evolution models. So if you look at the left one, you'll see that it goes from 1 and then it goes down to 2, 3, 4, 5. And on the bottom, we have a profile. So this is kind of the bottom of the channel. So what we would see is if a beaver dam was to break away, we'd see that channel start to incise. So it starts to go down here, it cuts down. And then from there, it gets down far enough that over here in class 4, the banks start to slough in. It no longer can hold the weight of the bank. So now the channel's widening, and then it starts to grade. And eventually you'll get this inset new channel with its new connected floodplain. So that's what we kind of think happened out at Lazy D. If we look at this right side, say it was kind of old beaver meadow, we'll look at this bottom here. If it was old beaver meadow and those beaver dams left, this channel would have cut down and it would have created a new floodplain at one point off to the side of the valley. So that's what we think happened. So if this were to happen on that river right side now, we'd expect this channel to cut down and we'd lose all those benefits of sediment storage from the fire coming down, less chance of wood being racked up into these side channels, all things that can help protect the homes downstream. We really want to use this area as a kind of catcher's mitt for sediment and wood. So these are kind of a reason why we want to go out into that area and stop these head cuts. So after that, I'll talk a little bit about river left, and then I'll go into different treatments we can do to do this. But on this river left side, in 2019, we can see it's completely full. This is where the beaver were. There's a channel going all the way down along the channel. It's a really beautiful example of working beaver meadow. You can see how it started again in 2016. The beaver's little pond has started to build it up and really back up water and spread water throughout here. And then 2019, you can just see the amount of willows and how much that water has really grown that riparian area. But what do we see today? So this is a picture from last summer. So this is actually the old beaver lodge that's in that pond. So you can see the little opening here. So the channel is completely dry. It did get burned through a little bit in this area. So we're thinking maybe the fire burn actually got rid of some of the food source for the beaver. So they did probably move out. We do know they tried that dam just farther downstream a year or two ago, but where they are now, we don't know. There might be even farther downstream. But what we're left with is it's just beaver meadow that's just ready for water to go in there. We just need to get the water back in before it's too late, before it dries out. Another little picture, this is an example of a channel farther down. And you can see again, here's a little beaver dam. This would have backed up water completely, but you can see there's nice, beautiful, mature vegetation. There's enough food source for the beaver. So this is a really good opportunity to just, if we re-wet it, the beaver have an opportunity to come right back in and move back into their lodge, which they do tend to do. So with that in mind, we kind of have major things we need to do to make this project a success. So number one, we need to stop the head cuts on this side. This is important because the head cuts migrate from downstream to upstream. Lower elevation is on this side, higher elevation. So these nick points or these head cuts will move upstream. So as they move upstream, they'll cut down. And eventually what could happen is it keeps sending more water to this right side. And then the channel could end up on the right side, which normally isn't a big deal. Channel avulsion can be healthy, disturbance can be healthy. However, if we want to re-get water and re-wet this whole entire river left side, the best area for beaver to come back with a good food source, we can't let the river jump past, because if it jumps past and ends up down here, the entrance to the beaver dam is up here. We're not going to be able to get it back in, especially without machines and just handwork, which is what we really want to do. We really want to go like really minimal invasive work with handwork, especially. So this is a really important step, is stopping these head cuts so we can help preserve this and get water back into the left side where beavers should come in first. So with that, how do we do that? So this is where low-tech process-based restoration has created a bunch of great tools. for us to kind of simulate beaver. So what we have here, the first thing I'm showing is just kind of like a design plan for what a simulated beaver structure could look like. There's tons of different ways these can be built these days, but essentially what we're doing is we're creating a beaver dam. So this can be done with posts. So if you look at the pictures down below, a lot of times you can come out there with kind of pneumatic drivers and you can just drive these posts into the ground really easily. And you can do willow weaves like we've seen on some of the pictures Hallie showed or on this detail, or you can bring in old pine branches. So we have a lot of down debris and burnt stuff. So we figure we can really use a lot of this burnt slash and really not have too much impact on the ecosystem, and really kind of put in piles and really back up these side channels again with a lot of simulated beaver structures. So we would just kind of place these upstream and downstream of head cuts to help slow those down, and other areas to spread that water back out, get the food supply back, and hopefully beaver jump in and take them back over. Another kind of treatment we tend to do are called cobble and slash bars, or speed bumps, we like to call them. It's just a different type of simulated beaver structure. So with these, they can be done with handwork in small streams as well. But you basically dig out little pool areas and you build a speed bump, and you basically get willows and stuff, all this vegetation in there. So it's just a different type of way to create a higher elevation, get vegetation to come in, and water will back up upstream. So it spreads water out, creates pool habitat, really connects the floodplain. So they're really good, again, at trapping sediment, catching wood that might be coming down. So this is just some examples of previous work. So this is Fish Creek up in Estes Park. So this was after the 2013 flood. So this is an area that was straightened and it had head cuts moving up through it. So we went in and this is like just a year or two after restoration. So I'll show you some newer pictures, but we basically, you can see these piles sticking out in the middle, and these are those simulated beaver structures. These were willow weave structures, but you can see the amount of water they back up. And this was just the first year. So there's some sediment backed up, but wait till you see the next pictures. So again, Fish Creek, same area. So you can now see, look at all the sediment that was piled up stream of each of these beaver dams. So these are really good at trapping sediment, keeping it on a landscape where we're okay, where the river can trap and then move around the BDA and keep going on its way. So adaptive management is something I'll talk about in a little bit, but out here, this is somewhere where we'd like to come back out and add some more BDAs the next year. So we keep trapping more and more sediment as these initial ones fill up. So over here, the Arkansas River and the South Fork of the South Platte River are other projects where we did have beaver on the river right one. So this is an area where you can see the beaver built on the speed bump and actually took it all over. And then this is another example where they took it over. So upstream is obviously the big ponded area. So speed bumps is just another way to really get beaver back into the system. Another look at the amount of sediment that was trapped in these beaver dam structures. You can now see all the vegetation that's come in around too. So we're getting that riparian buffer. And then you can see from the aerials, again, just how much sediments come in above these wood structures. Another thing we can do, this is a recent project out farther up in Fish Creek in Estes, where we basically did sod mat transplants and cut little channels with shovels. So we have one active beaver on this site. He's farther upstream. So these are old ponds. They're no longer working, that we're kind of draining. So we came in and built up the berms, just hand carried buckets and buckets of dirt, dumped them out, put sod mats on the front side, and we're starting to back up water all through the floodplain again. So this is just one more treatment you can do. So again, really less invasive, really minimal, all handwork. It's really great way to do the work out here. So when I mentioned adaptive management, what do we mean by this? So when you go out into a system where there used to be beaver, if there's beaver still there, that's ideal, because you can put these structures in, maybe they take them over, and then you can go away. The beaver, as long as there's more than one beaver, they can repopulate, they can continue to do the work for you. So that's great. A lot of times we are working in areas where there's not beaver. So what do we have to do is adaptive management. So we can't just go there, put these in, walk away, because especially with all the fire and the sediment coming in, we'd expect these dams to fill up in a year or two. So we'd want to go out and put new dams, because as it fills up, it'll flank around. And so we'll just want to create new dams. So until beaver are there, we kind of need to play beaver. So how this typically looks, this is just a little bit of a year 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the assessment design baseline conditions is year 1. Put it all in year 2 and kind of look at those initial treatments that were based from your assessment of what you want to do. And then you monitor, you watch what's happening, what's working, how much sediment's filling in. And then you go back out, you could go back out year 3, but maybe you go out year 4, you add new treatments, you modify existing treatments based on what you've learned from monitoring. And then year 5, monitor, and this can keep going. You know, these are projects where it's hard to really put them in and walk away unless you do have beaver on site and they can take it over. So it's really important to understand that this isn't just a do it and walk away type project. So just to summarize, I know I've talked to you guys a lot and it's probably like a fire hose. So we can go back to any of the aerials after and look at things if you have questions. But the major benefits from this project on Lazy D, not only will we get river corridor health and function back on these areas, especially where the beaver have moved out. We don't want to lose those lush areas, great for wildlife, other things beyond just kind of fire mitigation, flood mitigation, and then getting beaver back in the landscape, reconnecting that floodplain, dropping that sediment out. It really helps mitigate the increased risk of sediment and wood coming down the system from fire. We can attenuate the flood water. We can store it all locally right in this area where it's okay. There's no infrastructure, as opposed to downstream where we have bridges and houses where we don't want that stuff to accumulate. So it's a really important area upstream of all these areas where we can store stuff on the landscape that will help downstream structures. So with that, I will stop and see if there's questions for anything that we talked about. So I'll stop sharing.
Johannes, that was fabulous. Thank you so much. I just
Okay,
wanted to
good.
share one last piece with everybody and just mention some of the other partners involved with this this project that Johannes was going through. So we do have some funding partners that I want to give a shout out to. So we are working with the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service to provide some funding for this work, along with Colorado Parks and Wildlife with their Wetlands Grant Program. We're partnering pretty closely with the City of Fort Collins Water Utilities and also the Mighty Arrow Family Foundation. So it's pretty great to have all these partners involved in sharing this vision for this type of work. And as Johannes mentioned, you know, that adaptive management approach, we're hoping to be able to loop in CSU and the Rocky Mountain Research Station to do some of that monitoring to help with that adaptive approach. So just wanted to give a shout there, but other than that, I won't take up any more time and just really want to open it up for questions if anyone has any.
I just had one quick comment too. Hallie had a family obligation, so had to leave early. She didn't want to leave the meeting though, just in case it would shut the whole thing down because CPRW is the host. So if you have any questions about Hallie's presentation, my name is Megan. I work with CPRW. I can answer any questions about post-fire recovery. So just want to let you know that.
Yeah, I just want to thank you guys for putting together these great presentations. I just learned a lot tonight, and we really appreciate your work throughout the watershed. And you know, I think Laura took this really well earlier, that we just are very much in support of just improving the health of the watershed for all the entities that live and enjoy that place and depend on it. So thank you.
Well, and I just wanted to say thank you to you guys too for, I mean, it's your guys' property, and it really is really important, these beads in the chain for, you know, really protecting downstream infrastructure. So identifying these areas, getting landowners to be okay with areas where the river can do what it needs to during these events is really important. So really appreciate you guys being open to this.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
There's no such thing as a stupid question. If anyone has any, we'd love to hear them. If you couldn't tell already, we're pretty geeked out about this type of work. So if you don't think of anything tonight, that's totally fine. Maybe we can all just drop our contact info in the chat in case you guys want to reach out. But super happy to answer any questions tonight if you have any.
I'm just going to say thank you. And I tell my sixth graders the only stupid question is the one you don't ask. So ask away.
I'll have one question for the other landowners, the Gilberts, if that's okay, if I can ask you guys the questions. Do you guys have concerns with your properties or anything, or are you looking at work upstream on Pennock, or, you know, because this project's great for Little South Fork, but you also have Pennock Creek kind of coming upstream of you guys as well. So I just want to see if you guys have any concerns, interests. And it's fine if you don't want to answer too. I don't want to put you on the spot.
I'm learning so much tonight. I don't know anything about this. So this has been so interesting, but I don't even really know the questions to ask.
Perfect.
Yeah.
No, all good.
I don't know if Monique jumps in. She might.
I'm really thrilled that you guys took the time to do this, and yeah, I'm really interested to see how things come back and change over time, and appreciate that. I mean, we're happy to help in any way we can, obviously, but just really interested in learning more and thankful for all the work you guys are doing.
Great, thank you guys.
I have one question, Johannes, maybe you can answer this. This was from Hallie's presentation, but I was just super curious when she showed that picture. I think she said it was Sheep Creek, but she said referenced it being intermittent, but now perennial. Is that just because of surface water runoff? It's just become a year-round water source? Is that what happened?
Yes and no. So Megan, please jump into if you know specific. I don't know specific about Sheep Creek, but generally speaking, what happens after fire is you do get a lot more increased runoff. You're not getting evapotranspiration. However, there's a trade-off. Sometimes you're also not able to store water on the landscape as well. But usually immediately after fire, especially with how wet it's been, we'll see channels kind of run for 2, 3, maybe 10, maybe they stay perennial after, it just depends. But yeah, the hydrology usually changes based on lack of infiltration, lack of water going back into the soil. So it can just run off more frequently.
Wow, that's just so interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I didn't realize this until after Cameron Peak, but apparently there's multiple Sheep Creeks within the Upper Poudre Watershed.
Yeah.
So that's interesting too, and something to keep in mind. So I'm not super familiar with that picture that she showed, but I know that we're seeing things unravel like that throughout the burn area.
Yeah, that was a very interesting photograph.
I mean,
sure.
10 feet probably tall head cut. It's huge.
Right.
And also part of it too is just every time it rains now, even a little rainstorm, it just all goes to the channel. So normally it might not even do much of a trickle, but
right, because of the hydrophobic soils.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, of course.
I have a question. Well, 2 questions, I guess, 2-part. Can you comment on food sources for beaver? Obviously willow, but are there, I heard you say vegetation. So vegetation is actually a food source for beaver?
Yeah,
and then
so vegetation.
timing.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, vegetation, generic term for just all types of plants, but basically they like woody material. They eat the bark off of willows, aspen, cottonwoods. Those are kind of, there's more they'll do, but they love willows, alders, cottonwoods, aspens tend to be some of the major food sources for them, because the willows are great when they're small for food, but they like to use the alders, cottonwoods, other bigger things for dam building. So it's kind of nice to have a mixture of both. So right now in Lazy D, as you know, that bottom half, there's still really tall vegetation and there's some really good stuff in there. But I think maybe just too much of the food source maybe got burned in that upper meadow. Yeah. And
does fire, I mean, do you think in that particular spot, did fire kill some of the beaver off that might have been in there?
I have no idea. I know, I think Darcy was saying like they saw the beaver build a dam farther downstream by their bridge the next year. So I think they survived, but I think they just kind of, I don't know. My guess is right after the fire, it was probably not enough woody material right where they needed it to kind of build those dams and get the water in there. So once they couldn't get the water back into their lodge and all that, they probably started to move out. But it's a really good opportunity there. There's tons of really good food source still there. So as long as we get it wet and we keep that food source growing, hopefully they'll come back in.
Thank
One
you.
last
Very
point we
important.
haven't talked about
Interesting.
too much here, but as far as pre-fires, so wildfire mitigation, it kind of plays into that full cycle as well. And, you know, as you saw, there's still a lot that could burn in our watershed and the upper watershed. And so we hope too that this type of work could help with some of that wildfire mitigation, those efforts as well. That would be a whole other presentation, but just something to think about as we, you know, think about the full cycle of our forests and, you know, forest health.
No,
And
that's
Gretchen
great,
can talk
Megan.
way more about that because she's the forester in the room tonight.
Yeah, and I'll just say one thing, Megan, it's a great point. Just real quick, you know, we saw Willow Creek, all these other East Troublesome Fire, all these areas. They used to be beaver meadow, and so right after the fire, they did get kind of burned through. So initially, even myself was like, "Well, I thought these were supposed to be buffers, right? I thought it wouldn't burn, but it's not really necessarily that. It could still burn, but the next year you go out, willows are already sprouting, sediments trapping. So it's more about how quickly it recovers compared to, I mean, a big enough beaver meadow in other systems where they're huge can create buffers. And you can see that here too. And Gretchen can speak to it much better than I can, but they are still an important source, even if they do burn through that next year, they pop back. So.
Yeah, I think, Megan, that you brought up a really great point, which is that we really focused on the post-fire recovery and how this is a tool for that. But like you said, it's a really important tool that we can use as a preventative measure before a big wildfire too, alongside with some of the other watershed health work that we can do, like forest restoration in these watersheds, you know, removing trees in strategic places to help, you know, reduce that fire severity. So this is all stuff that these organizations here on this call are working on. So if anyone here has any questions, you know, Megan, Hallie, Johannes, and myself would be super happy to answer any questions. You know, this is our job to speak with community members and do that education. So any and all questions, you know, happy to have a phone call, and I'm sure Megan and Hallie feel the same. But I do want to be mindful of everyone's time. It's 7:05. So does anyone have any last questions before we kind of wrap this up for the evening?
I just want to just thank you for, I mean, the numbers with the funding sources that you guys have garnered for this type of work, watershed wise, all of you, is just super impressive. And it's just amazing to see all the work that's been done on the ground. And just really powerful what can happen when you get all these great team of people together. So thank you for your stewardship there in the watershed.
Thank you.
Yeah, please pass on to Hallie all of our thanks for that for that presentation, and Johannes for yours. That was really cool and informative. I learned something new every time I hear you speak about this stuff. So yeah, thank you all so much, and please don't be strangers. Reach out with any questions you might have, and yeah, hopefully see you out in the mountains sometime soon.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Have a good
Thanks,
night.
Darcy and Laura, for being here too.